plunged into something that I really knew very little about, and it was quite a while before I began to get a shape and format to it, and an understanding of the kind of rhythm and rituals of the monastery before I could sort of piece it together. And I guess it helped that I didn't have any preconceptions other than a kind of general ignorance or like cliche of what happens in the monastery. So it was, if you like, a period of discovery for myself in that way. Yeah. So, Jim.
Did it affect you personally in any way? You said you didn't know too much about what was going on. Did that have a sort of personal impact?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Catholic, and I told the nuns that, and that didn't seem to matter. Yeah, you can't spend a year in the company of those people without being affected. I mean, it was probably one of the best years I've ever spent in my life, to be honest. I mean, aside from my family, it really was a very memorable life, and I felt very privileged. In fact, as we were coming to the end of filming, I mean, the nuns or the sisters themselves didn't put a time limit on it, but there came a point after I'd pretty much been in and out over a year where I figured that I got enough material to make the film that I wanted to make. I then started to realise that I was going to miss going into the monastery, and I kept trying to invent various reasons to go back in. And in the end, I had to say to the sisters, look, I really have got enough material, so I'm going to have to come outside and become part of the general public again and not have that access. And I think usually what happens when you're making documentaries, the subject is the person that misses the process more than the maker. But I think in this instance, it's the other way around. I actually miss them more than they miss me. Yes? So.
Did they want to see the film or not?
Yeah, I think one of the... I felt that they placed a lot of trust in and confidence in allowing me in, because it's a really big thing, this. I mean, I don't think they'd ever had a film crew in, or anybody from the media in, and a man as well, so that... And to be given that complete freedom and access to go where I wanted and to film what I wanted. So one of the things that I said to them was that if at any point in the filmmaking or that filming that they felt it was an intrusion and just a hindrance to their way of life, then they could call a halt to it at any point, and anything that I filmed up to that point would never get shown, so that they had that. So not a veto, but if it was actually, as I say, a hindrance to what they wanted to do, or getting in the way, then they could call a halt to it. And the other thing I said is that because of the technology that we have, I could put my rushes on the DVD, and although they use computers for emails and online shopping, as you can see, they could actually view some of the rushes. So they were sort of party to the filmmaking process. But they didn't have any kind of editorial control or vetoes in that sense. But I said I wouldn't misrepresent them, and as I think in a sense that gave them the confidence to carry on, because they could see how they were being recorded and what was being recorded. And I think that once they got over the shock of what they looked like, because they don't have mirrors, and they obviously haven't seen themselves in that way before. I think they kind of liked it in a curious way. And then they saw that I lent them quite a large screen TV and a DVD player so they could look at the finished film. So,
Did they place any restrictions?
No, none at all. In fact, I think it was I restricted myself rather than. There are certain things I felt I didn't really want to. I felt, although I did go into their cells, I felt slightly uncomfortable. So that's their only sort of private little, And I did go in and film a couple of the sisters in their cells, either in prayer or in contemplation. But it didn't seem to add anything to the film in that sense. And excuse me, during silent prayer, which is where the whole monastery just goes quiet for an hour and they just pray in silence. And I felt slightly odd sticking a camera in their faces during that time. But they didn't seem to mind. I mean, they said that it doesn't bother us, Michael, you just carry on. But I felt more difficult about it than they did. But no, in fact, every time I went, I think at first they were very wary. I mean, because they'd obviously taken a democratic vote as to whether to allow me in or not. And having done that, I think they weren't quite sure what it was going to be like. And so I started off being doing rather banal things like putting the camera up in a cloister and just waiting for them to walk up and down, so that it would be a very simple way of introducing them to the film. In fact, the first few times I did that, I went into the monastery and sort of like knew where they would walk, so I thought I'll put the camera there. And of course they then took the long way around to avoid the camera, so for many hours I was just looking at an empty corridor and things like that. But eventually, and so when I, towards the, after a while, the prioress would let me into the monastery, and I would say, well, I'd like to film this today or that. And she was like, Michael, the sisters know you're coming in. Just, we know what happens, and just carry on. We know you're here. And so I had no restrictions whatsoever.
Two little stories you might relate to is that in a complete reversal of your waiting, the Franciscan superior down in San Giovanni Rotondo, down in Foggia in Puglia, was desperate to get Renzo Piano to do his new basilica. And Renzo Piano in Rome would take no calls from this Franciscan. So he emailed him at 9 every morning for 6 years, without fail, 9 o'clock every morning. And it worked. And so if you go tactical, and of course it's the same man who's done the big development, the centre part, Renzo Piano. The other story I thought you might like is that the Trappists in the Czech Republic at the monastery of Novi Duri invited John Pawson to do their monastery. And John isn't Catholic. It was a lovely story of him meeting the abbot a year or two back, showing him the plans of this. It's a big thing for an architect to get a commission for a Trappist monastery. About every 300 years he would get that commission. And John sat down with the abbot and showed him where the new library would be. And he said, rest assured, Father Abbot, any monk sitting in the library, working in the library, will have no view of the cemetery. And rather like your own. And the abbot just smiled. He said, John, Trappists have no problems looking at cemetery. But my question, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. My question is, do you have any plans to show the film in Spain?
Well, I'd like to. I mean, we're just about to sign a distributor deal for this country. So we're hoping it'll get into cinemas sometime early next year. I would like it to go into the cinemas around about Easter, because it will something like that. And then I guess once it gets that, it's a kind of getting it out and getting it publicised and things like that. I mean, it's not sort of general commercial fodder in that sense, but it would be nice to get. I mean, particularly up to St. Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and stuff like that. So, yeah, we work very hard to do that. It would be a shame. Well, I would find it rather sad that it has a small audience, and we're trying to get it out there as much as we possibly can. We're working on it. Trying to get the Catholics behind us and all of that. And there's a very good network, so we're locked into that at the moment. You were going to ask?
I'm just going to ask, how long did it take to cut? Were you noticing as you went wrong?
I started to edit. I started filming in February 2008, and I started to edit round about May or June. And then but really tentatively, just sort of playing around with things.
By yourself?
Yeah, and it wasn't until, this is part nervousness, you know, because it's you, in your head the film is so much better before you start to edit it, you know, so you're just thinking this is great, and then when you put it together you're thinking, oh no, actually I've really messed up that sequence and stuff like that. So it didn't really start to, I didn't really sit down to edit it until around about November.